beneath the scorching African sun that transformed the vast savanna into a shimmering golden landscape, where ancient acacia trees stood like sentinels against the endless horizon and the air carried the mingled scents of dry earth and wild creatures. A profound drama was about to unfold that would challenge everything observers thought they knew about the natural world. The intense heat created rippling mirages across the grasslands, while a gentle breeze stirred the tall vegetation, carrying with it an almost palpable sense of tension that seemed to whisper of the eternal struggle between life and death that defined existence in this unforgiving wilderness. David Morrison, a seasoned wildlife ranger whose weathered face bore the marks of countless years spent under the relentless African sun, was conducting his routine patrol through the remote sections of the game reserve when his trained eye caught sight of something that immediately set his nerves on edge. Through his powerful binoculars, he observed a heart-wrenching scene that epitomized the brutal reality of survival in the wild. A young lion cub, barely old enough to have ventured far from its mother's protective presence, had somehow become entangled in the deadly coils of a massive African rock python. The enormous serpent, measuring well over 4 meters in length and possessing the muscular power to crush the bones of much larger prey, had wrapped itself around the helpless cub with the mechanical precision that had made its species one of Africa's most efficient predators. Each rhythmic contraction of the python's powerful body drew its coils tighter around the cub's small frame, methodically squeezing the life from the young lion with the same inexorable force that had claimed countless victims throughout millions of years of evolutionary refinement. David's experienced eye could immediately assess the dire nature of the situation as he watched the cub's increasingly feeble struggles against the python's suffocating embrace. The young lion's golden eyes, which should have been bright with the curiosity and energy of youth, were already beginning to dim as oxygen deprivation took its inevitable toll, while its small body trembled with the effort of drawing each increasingly difficult breath through compressed lungs and constricted airways. The ranger's first instinct was to intervene immediately, his hand instinctively moving toward the tranquilizer rifle that could potentially incapacitate the python and save the cub's life. But years of experience in wildlife management had taught him that hasty actions in such delicate situations often resulted in tragedy rather than rescue. A poorly aimed dart or any sudden movement that might startle the already stressed python could trigger an immediate and fatal increase in constricting pressure that would crush the cub's fragile ribs and spine in seconds. David found himself caught in the agonizing dilemma that confronted many wildlife professionals. The conflict between natural human compassion that demanded immediate action to save an innocent life and the professional understanding that nature's processes, however brutal they might appear to human sensibilities, represented the fundamental balance that had sustained ecosystems for millions of years. His heart raced with frustration as he weighed the potential consequences of intervention against the certainty of the cub's death if he remained passive. As David struggled with this impossible decision, his attention was suddenly captured by unexpected movement in the tall grass surrounding the deadly encounter. From the golden vegetation emerged a spotted hyena, its distinctive silhouette immediately recognizable despite the shimmering heat that distorted the distant landscape. Under normal circumstances, the appearance of a hyena at such a scene would have represented nothing more than opportunistic scavenging behavior, as these resourceful carnivores were well known for their ability to capitalize on the misfortunes of other animals by claiming whatever scraps might remain after successful predation. However, something about this particular hyena's demeanor struck David as profoundly different from the typical behavioral patterns he had observed in countless similar situations throughout his career. Rather than maintaining the cautious distance that characterizes most scavenger species, as they await the completion of another predator's kill, this hyena approached the python and its victim with a sense of purpose and urgency that seemed to transcend mere opportunism. The hyena's dark eyes, instead of displaying the calculating patience typical of its species, held an intensity and focus that suggested a far more complex motivation than simple hunger or territorial interest. Its body language conveyed a sense of agitation and concern that was completely at odds with the detached indifference that normally characterized interspecies interactions in the wild, particularly between traditional competitors like hyenas and the big cats that dominated the same ecological niche. Without warning or hesitation, the hyena suddenly launched itself into aggressive action against the python, its powerful jaws clamping down on the serpent's thick, muscular body, while its claws sought purchase on the smooth scales that provided protection against most forms of attack. The intensity of the assault was shocking in its ferocity, as the hyena employed every weapon at its disposal in a desperate attempt to force the python to release its death grip on the lion cub. David watched in stunned disbelief as this unprecedented scene unfolded before him, his years of wildlife observation having provided no framework for understanding the motivation behind such extraordinary behavior. Here was a hyena, a species often dismissed as cowardly and opportunistic, not only foregoing the easy meal that the cub's death would provide, but actually risking its own safety in a direct confrontation with one of Africa's most dangerous predators in order to save the life of a creature that represented its natural competitor and traditional enemy. The battle that ensued was both brief and brutal, as the python's superior size and constricting power ultimately proved overwhelming against the hyena's courageous but ultimately futile assault. Despite the hyena's desperate efforts to bite through the serpent's protective scales and force it to abandon its prey, the inexorable physics of constriction continued to squeeze the remaining life from the lion cub's small body until its struggles finally ceased and its golden eyes closed forever. The moment of the cub's death was marked by a profound silence that seemed to settle over the entire landscape, as if the very earth itself was acknowledging the passage of another innocent life from the world of the living. The python, having successfully completed its kill, began the process of repositioning its prey for consumption while coiling its massive body into a protective circle around its hard-won meal. David expected the hyena to retreat at this point, perhaps to wait at a respectful distance for any opportunity to claim scraps from the python's feast, but instead witnessed behavior that defied every assumption about animal psychology and interspecies relationships that he had developed throughout his extensive career. Rather than accepting defeat and moving on to seek easier opportunities elsewhere, the hyena approached the now victorious python with an expression of profound determination that transcended any simple predatory motivation. In a display of strength and endurance that seemed almost superhuman in its scope, the hyena seized both the dead lion cub and portions of the python's coiled body in its powerful jaws and began the arduous process of lifting and carrying this enormous burden away from the site of the tragedy. The combined weight of the cub and the serpent represented nearly twice the hyena's own body mass, making every step a monumental effort that required extraordinary physical and psychological commitment. David followed at a discreet distance as the hyena embarked on what could only be described as an epic journey across the savannah, its every movement revealing an unwavering sense of purpose that suggested a destination known only to the animal itself. The sight of this solitary predator, struggling beneath such an enormous burden, while displaying such single-minded determination, created an image that seemed to transcend the boundaries between the natural and the supernatural, elevating what might otherwise have been viewed as mere animal behavior into something approaching the mythic. The hyena's slow but steady progress across the varied terrain of the savannah required it to navigate through dense thorn bushes, across dried stream beds, and over rocky outcroppings, while never allowing its precious cargo to touch the ground or be abandoned, despite the obvious physical toll that such exertion was taking on its body. The animal's commitment to completing this mysterious mission appeared absolute, unshakable by fatigue, heat, or the countless obstacles that the landscape placed in its path. After what felt like hours of this extraordinary pilgrimage, David's binoculars revealed their ultimate destination. A small rise in the terrain where a pride of adult lions had gathered, their magnificent forms clearly visible against the golden backdrop of the late afternoon savannah. The group consisted of two powerful males, whose dark manes proclaimed their dominance, accompanied by two females whose alert postures indicated their awareness of the approaching hyena and its unusual burden. David braced himself for the violent confrontation that seemed inevitable when the territorial lions encountered a traditional enemy carrying one of their young, but once again found his expectations completely overturned by the reality of what transpired. Rather than launching an immediate attack or displaying the aggressive territorial behavior that typically characterized such encounters, the lions maintained their positions while displaying an almost ceremonial stillness that suggested they somehow understood the significance of what was taking place. The hyena approached to within a respectful distance of the lion pride, and carefully lowered its burden to the ground, placing the body of the dead cub directly before the assembled adults, while stepping backward in a gesture of submission that was both unmistakable and deeply moving in its implications. The python, still partially coiled around its victim but weakened by the ordeal of being carried such a great distance, hissed threateningly but lacked the energy to mount any serious resistance to this transfer of custody. What followed was a moment of profound silence that seemed to suspend the normal flow of time and space, as two species that had been locked in eternal conflict found themselves united by the shared experience of loss and the recognition of a grief that transcended all boundaries of instinct and territorial imperative. The lionesses gazed upon the still form of the cub with expressions that conveyed depths of sorrow that no human language could adequately describe, while the hyena maintained its respectful distance with a dignity and solemnity that elevated it far above the stereotypical image of its species as mere scavengers and opportunists. David realized that he was witnessing something that challenged not only his understanding of animal behavior, but his fundamental assumptions about the nature of consciousness, empathy, and moral reasoning in the non-human world. Here was clear evidence that the complex emotions and ethical considerations that humans often claimed as uniquely their own were in fact part of a much broader spectrum of awareness that extended throughout the animal kingdom in ways that science was only beginning to recognize and understand. The hyena had somehow recognized the scent signature of this particular lion pride from across vast distances and had undertaken an arduous and dangerous journey for no purpose other than to return their deceased young to them, foregoing any personal benefit and actually expending enormous amounts of energy and assuming considerable risk in order to complete what could only be described as an act of profound interspecies compassion and respect. The scene that unfolded beneath the golden light of the African sun served as a powerful reminder that the natural world contained depths of complexity and emotional sophistication that far exceeded most human assumptions about animal intelligence and social awareness. The hyena's extraordinary behavior demonstrated that even species traditionally viewed as primitive or driven solely by instinct were capable of moral reasoning and empathetic responses that rivaled the highest expressions of human ethical behavior. As David lowered his binoculars and reflected on the profound implications of what he had witnessed, he understood that this single extraordinary encounter had forever changed his perspective on the relationship between different species and the potential for understanding and cooperation that existed even among traditional enemies. The hyena's selfless act of returning the lion cub to its family represented not just an isolated incident of unusual animal behavior, but a window into a level of consciousness and moral awareness that suggested the boundaries between human and animal psychology were far less distinct than previously believed. This remarkable story served as a powerful metaphor for the potential that existed within all living beings to transcend their basic instincts and respond to suffering with compassion rather than indifference, demonstrating that even in the harsh and unforgiving environment of the African wilderness, there remained possibilities for connection and understanding that could bridge even the widest gaps between different forms of life. The image of the hyena struggling across the savanna with its precious burden would remain etched in David's memory as proof that the natural world still held mysteries and wonders that could humble and inspire anyone fortunate enough to witness them.